and for me, it's again a lot of serendipity. We're all presented with opportunities throughout our life, and it's a matter of whether you decide to take those opportunities.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Book Leads Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Jaramillo. This podcast series is about getting to the books that have impacted the lives of the people in my network. So these are great leads that I'll be having conversations with to get to those books that have made the most impact on their life, their work, their business, whatever it may be. All those worlds intersect. And my guest today is David A. Bossert. And David is an award-winning artist, filmmaker, and author. He received his BA from CalArts School of Film and Video with a major in character animation. As a 32-year veteran of the Walt Disney Company, he contributed his talents to The Black Cauldron, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas, The Lion King, among so many others. He is now an independent producer and creative director and writer. David is a member of CalArts Board of Trustees, Visual Effects Society, the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences, and is a visiting scholar at Carnegie Mellon University's Entertainment Technology Center in Pittsburgh, among so many memberships that I've listed as well. He has presented and lectured at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Salvador Dali Museum, School of Visual Arts, the NYU Film School, Bowers Museum, Newport Beach Film Festival, Fundació Gala-Salvador Dalí in Spain, and Oscar Pomillio-Blumm Forum in Italy, among many others. He's a historian widely regarded as an expert in the realm of Disney animation, art, and history. As an author, David has published 13 books, numerous articles, liner notes, and program notes. His latest books are The House of the Future, Walt Disney, MIT, and Monsanto's Vision of Tomorrow, and Find Your Happy Place, the 8-step guide to boosting your creativity through a personal retreat. Learn more about David at davidbossert.com. David, am I pronouncing your last name correctly?
Yes, you are,
Okay.
and I appreciate it. It's Bossert, yes.
Okay. I as somebody with my last name, I try to be very sensitive about people's last names. So I realized I didn't ask you that before we started recording. I'm glad I kind of hit that one right. David, in any case, great bio. Thank you for sitting down for this conversation with me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here, John, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So David, starting off, amazing bio. I'm curious. We're limited on time, but I'm curious to get into how you found yourself in all these various situations and places and memberships and teaching and lecturing. But first off, who are you today? So obviously that's a very thorough bio, but what does your work look like in the day-to-day today? How would you describe that? How would you share that just so we get a sense of who's sharing their book with us?
Yeah, look, I spent more than 32 years at the Walt Disney Company in a variety of roles, from animator to visual effects supervisor, creative director, producer, executive producer. I wore many different hats on many different projects. And today, I'm still that person. I'm a producer, I'm a content producer, and I'm a writer, and I'm a speaker. And, I kind of smiled a little bit while you were reading my bio and talking about some of the museums and whatnot that I've lectured at. I actually just got back from speaking at the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum last week. So I really enjoy going out and doing presentations when the opportunities arise.
So David, just curious about the museum you just mentioned. What's your tie to that museum? What was your talk, or what is it that you delivered?
Yeah, the museum reached out to me because last Thursday they opened an exhibition called The Walt Disney Studios in World War II. And so they had reached out to me many months ago and asked if I'd be interested in doing a theater presentation at the museum related to Walt Disney, the Walt Disney Studios, and World War II. And so I was able to put together a presentation, and it kind of dovetailed into a new book I have coming out this fall, which is titled Walt Disney, World War II, Animation on the Front Lines.
Wow.
and it details that period from 1941 to essentially, the war ended in 1945, but some of the contracts Walt had from the government, were delivered in 1946. So it's really that 5 year period from 41 to 46, and that's coming out in the fall. So it was in my wheelhouse, and I was happy to put together a presentation that complemented the exhibition that opened last week.
So what was it, just as a sidebar, a tangent, if you will, you'll see that I kind of pull you into those as we go through this conversation.
Sure.
What was it that triggered you to, or pushed you along or guided you towards that particular period of time? I mean, it's an interesting time for what I know of the Disney company, but what is it about that period that made you want to say, that's what I want to jump to next and write about?
Well, while I was working at the Walt Disney Company, I was fascinated with that period of the company's history, and I was able to do a lot of research on the inside while I was at the company. And I had access to a lot of material that, a normal writer on the outside might not have been able to access or knew where to find that information. And so, for me, I pick topics from my books that I'm passionate about and that haven't really been covered in depth the way you would think they should have been. Like, for instance, you mentioned my House of the Future book. There is no other book on the House of the Future at Disneyland. So I was fascinated by that topic because I never got a chance to walk through that house. So I wanted to do a detailed, in-depth exploration of the home and present it in a book form. So when a person got done reading it, they felt like they had experienced the House of the Future without actually stepping into it.
Can you speak to what the House of the Future is? I remember it
Yeah.
vaguely from when I was younger,
Yeah,
hearing about it, but
the House of the Future. So if you go back again, and this ties back into World War II, because the Monsanto company developed plastics and polymers that were used widely during the war, and after the war, they were looking to grow their plastics division, and so they commissioned a couple of architects at MIT and a civil engineer to come up with a new type of house that would be built not through traditional methods, but using plastics as structural supports and all of that. And so they came up with this House of the Future, which was made out of fiberglass, essentially, and just about everything that could be fabricated in plastics was made of plastic on the inside of the house. So, laminates and, for furniture and foam, all kinds of stuff that was generated through Monsanto and some of their divisions. And so to me, it was a fascinating piece of history and something I wanted to dive into because I didn't have the chance to see it. It had closed long before I first stepped foot in Disneyland. So, so each one of the books I've written over the years is sort of, that's the common thread. It's my Kem Weber mid-century furniture designs for the Disney studios is another example. It's the only book on the animation furniture that Kem Weber designed for Disney. And by the way, I'm sitting at a 1939 Kem Weber designed animation desk that the studio gave me when I left. So this is where I write my books, and I've been working on this desk. It's coming up on 40 years now.
wow.
So
when it comes to you, since you've left Disney, where in your bio it shares you're an independent producer, creative director, writer, how do you balance? What does it look like when you're trying to juggle all those different roles? Like, even if you
Well,
could give some examples of some projects that you're working on now,
yeah,
just
sure.
generally.
I'm executive producing a children's show that's in late stage development and is being shopped around. So I spend time on that when I need to, and do the various meetings via Zoom. I'm continuously researching different topics that will eventually turn into books in the future. And I'm writing every day, some amount, whether it's an article I'm writing, or whether it's research material that I'm starting to get organized and put into a Word document for the eventual formation into a manuscript for a book. So to me, I just keep busy, and I don't. People say to me, "Are you retired?" And I just really hate that word. I don't like using that word "retired,"
Yeah.
because frankly, I don't think anyone should retire. I think
Mm.
what you should do is you should be shifting gears at some point and doing things that you really want to do, that you're not waking up in the morning, dragging yourself out of bed going, oh, not another day, I got to
Yeah.
punch the clock or whatever. But rather you're springing out of bed, excited about the day and excited about what you're going to accomplish. So, I mean, that's sort of my viewpoint. And I also look at a career as ever evolving. You have to, when I started working at the studio, I started out in an entry level position, and I was always looking forward and always wanting to learn something new. And you just keep working that way, and you start moving yourself up the ladder. You start expanding your skill set. And my favorite piece of advice to people is always say yes. I told people at the studio, and this was a piece of advice I got from somebody when I was early in my career at the studio. I talked to a friend of mine, John. He had already been at the studio for 45 years. I mean, he had started in the 1950s at the studio. And I said to him, I said, John, what do you attribute your longevity to at the company? And he said to me, I always said yes. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? He says, well, if somebody came into my office and said, John, can you do whatever the task was? I would just say yes. And he goes, and when they left my office, I'd go, holy crap, how do I do that? I got to go figure that out.
Yeah. Yeah. I
So,
always enjoy when I hear people talk about that power of yes. There's certain situations where you may not say yes when it's like a real deep specialization, like something medical, obviously, something to that effect. But really stepping outside of your zone, stepping outside of your lane and exploring something else.
yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. I do think that you have to step outside your comfort zone. Look, the first book I wrote, honestly, I will tell you, I never thought I would write books, and I've written 15 books now, right? And I had somebody make a suggestion to me, gee, you should put all of those stories into a book, Dave. And it had to do with my relationship with Roy Disney and the fact that I worked on a lot of projects he executive produced. I became friends with him. I traveled with him. And after he passed away, I wound up stepping in to do some presentations that he was slated to do. And a friend of mine said, hey, why don't you write a book about this? And I kind of laughed it off at first, but it kind of sat in the back of my mind. And it was something that a few months later, I decided, I'm gonna look into seeing how to write a book. And so what I did was I literally went on Amazon and searched for a book on how to write a book.
Yeah.
And so I got that. And I don't even think I ever finished that book. I think I read most of it. But what I gleaned out of it was, if I was going to write a book, I need to write a synopsis of what the book is about, and I need to write a sample chapter. And so I did both those things. And then I did a cold email to an editor at the Disney Publishing Group. And I was already, working in the company at the time. And so I just reached out. I said, hey, I did this manuscript, or I have this synopsis and sample chapter on a book about Roy Disney. What do you think? And they said, oh, let's meet and let's talk. And that turned into yeah, we'd love to do this book. And then after they said, we want to do this book, and they gave me a book contract, I walked away going, oh my God, I've got to write a book. So then you just go and do it, and you write it. And it was a learning curve for me, but when I turned that manuscript in, I pitched them a second book, and they said, great, we'd love to do that book. And so I set out to start writing that book. And then I pitched them a third book, and they said, yep, we'd love to do that book too. And at that point I got a literary agent, and, so having never done that before, sure, there's a certain amount of fear, but you do have to step outside your comfort zone and say, okay, they want me to do this. I'm going to go do this, and I'm going to try and do the best I possibly can at it.
So when you brought up fear, that's great, because I love talking about fear. So for you have that fear. What does your fear specifically look like? Just because so many people have like a fear of failure, or they have a fear that, okay, it's similar to failure, but that they'll look silly in front of other people. For you, you got through it, but what did your particular fear, how did that come through? What was in your mind with that concern, with that fear?
Look, for me, I think I'm almost impervious to those types of things. I mean, you certainly feel a certain amount of fear, but, to me, it's not so much the fear of failure. It's maybe fear of embarrassment, and that's about it. But, having worked as an artist for more than 3 decades at the Disney studios, I became very thick-skinned for criticism, and was able to have the capacity to filter out,
the good stuff from the bad stuff.
The good comments from the bad comments, okay?
Yeah.
And we always have room for improvement. So I had that mindset. So, for me, I just wanted to do a book that honored Roy Disney. So my fear was that I wouldn't achieve that, or somehow it would fall short. But I put a lot of effort into it, and I had to also get the family behind it. And the family, there was a lot of cross currents there, and so, the children, from Roy's first wife, he'd been married for 50 years, and he wound up divorcing his wife and marrying somebody younger. So, getting the widow of Roy to come on board, and how I was going to handle the divorce and the remarriage, and all of those things, contribute to a certain stress level and a certain fear that you're going to mess up.
That's a different level that's such a different level of fear when you're. That's why I'm always amazed at actors that take on biopics where, especially when the person is still alive, you know what I mean? But something as personal as that, I can only imagine. As prolific as you've been in your writing, what is your writing process? What kind of, everybody has their own mechanism, their own process, their own field that they're focused on, so it may look different from genre to genre. But for you, what works for you? What's your writing process?
For me, it's really doing a lot of research into the topic, because most of my books are all of my books are nonfiction, and so it's really doing the in-depth research, and I let the research guide me as to what is the story I want to tell. So, and that starts to bubble up through the research. And sometimes, these books will take years of research before you actually sit down and write it. So for me, I probably have a half a dozen project folders on my desktop that I'm doing research on a regular basis. I'm finding stuff, I'm sticking it into these folders. And then at some point, I feel like, I've hit a critical mass, and I say, okay, now I need to organize this into a coherent story. And I'm going through that process right now with my World War II book. And the fact that, look, I will freely tell you, I've been researching this for more than 30 years, and it's not a continuous research thing, but it's,
Yeah.
making trips to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. And, all the years I was at the studio, and I was, slowly acquiring information and, getting files to go through and things like that. And so you have all of this material. Now it's sort of like, okay, what's the story you want to tell? And, what's your viewpoint on this material? And that's kind of where I've put this whole World War II book right now. And the next book I do is probably going to be a little bit lighter project. I'm adding to my, I put out 2 books, on 3D, they're 3D images, 3D photography. One is called 3D Disneyland, like you've never seen it before. And the second one is 3D National Parks, like you've never seen it before. So there's not as much text in those books. There's a sort of a handful of text up front, and then there's usually about 100 3D photographs where you actually put on 3D glasses to look at the images.
Okay.
Right. So after I finish this monumental World War II book that, is going to be more than 300 pages, it's something that has been percolating for decades with me. Once that's out of the way, I'll probably go on to my next book, which is 3D World War I, like you've never seen it before.
Wow.
And then the book after that will probably be a little bit more in-depth book. I've been doing research on a particular artist, and I've been gathering all of the material I can find, magazine articles and all of that. And I'm doing a focused book on this guy who was killed during World War II. His career was cut short, and had his career not been cut short, he probably would have been as well known, I think, as Norman Rockwell or J.D. Leyendecker or some other artists of that period. So so my process is one where I can juggle multiple balls. I'm doing research, I'm writing, I'm doing all kinds of things on multiple fronts. To move a bunch of projects forward until one of those projects is like, okay, that's critical mass, and I can do that now. So,
do you find you have that what you do or what you choose to work on? I know you say sometimes you come across stuff and you're like, okay, that would go good with this project.
Yeah.
Do you find that you can sit down at your computer and you have the option of which project to work on, but then based on your energy and where your mindset is, you lean more towards one than the other?
Yeah, absolutely. Without question. And there's no right way of doing this. And that's the thing that I would tell the listeners here is that you have to find what's comfortable for you. Stephen King, I think he tries to write 1,000 or 2,000 words a day. Ernest Hemingway, I think he wrote 250 to 500 words a day. Everybody has their own thing. I sort of set a personal goal of trying to write 1,000 words a day, but there's some days in between projects where I'm only writing maybe a few hundred words, for various things. There's other times when I'm really sort of in the zone and I can do 1,500 words, and the key to it though is to sit down and just do it. You got to show up every day and do it. You got to be committed. And writing, they say is a very solitary type of process, but and it is to a certain degree, but actually creating a book, it takes a group of people.
Yeah.
Because you've got to have what I refer to as beta readers, people that may know the material and you trust to take on the task of reading your manuscript and giving you notes, right? And you have to be able to take those notes and evaluate them, and I typically sit there and look at notes from various people. And if I start to see a common thread, it's something I need to address. Other notes, sometimes I've gotten notes where I look at it and go, yeah, okay, I understand that note, but that's not the story I want to tell.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but you have to be, you can't, you can't be overly sensitive to the criticisms and the notes. And that's why I think my time at Disney sort of gave me that thick skin, that I can not be offended or hurt or, any of those emotions that you can typically feel sometimes when somebody gives you a note about something.
David, to understand how you ended up here, can you give me a sense of how you started off on your path, even, what you were like as a teen, what you studied, or how you determined to, what you wanted to study in college? It's a loaded question, but I want to learn the path that got you here. And I love learning about, even before you go into the workforce, like what is it that puts you on a certain path?
It's interesting. I often tell people that a lot of my career has just been serendipity. It's been accidental. Things drop into your lap, and you have to be ready to take those things as they come along. They're opportunities that just appear. And that goes back to the idea of just saying yes to things. I had, throughout my career, I had people come into my office and say, can you do whatever? And I would say, yeah, we can take care of that. And then I would have to go figure out how to do it. And I'd go find people and go talk to people and get advice on how to do something, learn some new process. This is all part of, what I like to say is a lifetime of learning. We're constantly learning new things, I'm learning something every day, typically, and it has nothing to do with whether I'm writing a book or I just moved into a new house and I'm unpacking and I have to deal with a contractor or this, and I have to learn, about something that is in the house, and all of those kinds of things are things that we all go through, but you also have opportunities that drop into your lap every day. The friend who said you should put all those stories into a book, most people would just kind of, I don't know about that.
Yeah,
And there's also, I talk about this in my Find Your Happy Place book. There's, you hear everyone say this, someday I'd like to. I wish I could. And I think we're living in such an amazing time right now because if you want to learn how to do something, it's a couple keystrokes away.
Yeah.
If you can, I mean, you can find a YouTube video on how to do just about anything now,
Absolutely.
there's courses that you can take for as little as, $5 or $10. And you can learn things on public speaking, giving presentations, writing a book, how to organize your life. I mean, the topics and things go on and on. How do I use, editing software? How do I, use Photoshop? There are courses available at your fingertips that you can learn all of this stuff. So to me, it's really amazing. But I was laughing as you started asking me this question because I can vividly remember being in high school. I think I was in 10th grade. And I was a wise ass. And my English teacher, I was in English class, the English teacher, and I can't even remember her name, by the way. The English teacher made some comment to the class, and the class was just sitting there just blank. Nobody was saying anything. She asked a question, and I gave a sort of a flip answer that made the class laugh. and she was pissed. And she said to me, she said, the closest thing I'd ever get to books would be reading them in prison, you know? And I have to tell you, John, every time I have a new book published, I think of that moment, you know, because I jokingly say when one of my books is, you know, I get the first copy sent to me, I jokingly laugh and say to my wife, "You hear that whirring sound? Yeah, that's my English teacher spinning in her grave." You know, so,
Yeah. So
but
did it when she said that? I mean, obviously you remember that moment when she
yes.
said that. Did you feel something click in your mind, like maybe it turned your ambition, your drive around a little bit, or was it
Not
later, like after you
yeah.
found your career,
Look,
that she came to mind?
it wasn't at that moment, no, not at all. But
Yeah.
it stuck with me for whatever
Yeah.
reason, and you know, I think I do have that personality. When somebody says I can't do something, then I sit there and go, okay, now I have to do it. You
And
know?
where does that come from in you,
So,
David?
and I couldn't tell you where that comes from. I just think that's a drive where, you know, you're challenged when, you know, it's again, it goes back to somebody coming in and saying, hey, can you do X, Y, or Z? And you just say, yes, I can do that, and not know how to do it, but go figure out how to do it, you know? So I think it's all of that. And for me, it's again, a lot of serendipity. You know, we're all presented with opportunities throughout our life, and it's a matter of whether you decide to take those opportunities. And, you know, as a leader at the Walt Disney Company, I headed up a special projects unit. I had 18 people at one point working for me, plus multiple vendors on the outside of the company that I was managing. And, you know, I would sit there and say to somebody, hey, I want you to do blah, whatever that was. And I would sometimes get the person looking at me go, oh, I don't know how to do, I can't do that, you know? And that's just a bad thinking as far as I'm concerned. Because if somebody comes to you and says, I want you to do something, they obviously have some confidence in you. They're seeing
Exactly.
something in you that they
Exactly.
think they know you can do this. And instead of saying, oh, no, I can't do that, how about say, oh, I want to do that. I'm not sure how to do it. And then you figure it out with them, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I'm seeing that a growing call from leaders to their people saying, listen, get in there, innovate, give us your ideas, you know, fail smart. But try something. You never know what's going to come out of it. So you're seeing more and more people pick up that mindset with those leaders that are really leaving the door open for experimentation. So that's a great point to bring up, how important that
Yeah.
is.
And you know, the thing I'd add to this is the fact that failure is not you know, it's not a disaster. You
Exactly.
always learn something from failure. And, you know, look, so many people have cited it. It's just, you know, become somewhat obvious now. But, you know, Thomas Edison
Hmm.
did not, you know, fail at developing the light bulb. He discovered however many elements would not work in the light bulb until he got to tungsten, you know? So the point being is that it's okay to experiment. It's okay to fail, but do you learn something from that failure? And out of those failures, does it, you know, do you find the solution to whatever it is you're looking for? And so I always have that sort of positive outlook, you know, hey, look, I'm going to try something. And if I fail, I fail. That's okay. But as long as I learn something from it and move forward, you know, and that's really what everybody should be doing. I find a lot of people do have negative attitudes. And it's sort of, you got to get rid of that stinking thinking. as they say, because it just drags you down. And, we all have the ability in ourselves to, course correct and to go down different paths and pursue things.
Yeah.
And, an awful lot of entrepreneurs have started out that way. I mean, you look at some of the look at the Walt Disney Company. Walt Disney and his brother Roy started in their Uncle Robert's garage. They started the Walt Disney Company. And then they moved to a storefront. And then from the storefront, they moved to a small studio that they were able to start expanding. Hewlett Packard started in a garage. People have started business. Jeff Bezos started selling books over the internet, and he was boxing books in a garage at his house. He's one of the richest men in the world now. So you have to learn how to do things and figure it out as you go. And that's the world we live in. And especially today with all of the rhetoric that's going on about AI, right? It's exactly the same type of rhetoric that was happening 30, 35 years ago with the introduction of personal computers. Okay? It's the same type of rhetoric as computer graphics were coming into the animation business. Oh my God, it's going to replace my job. Oh my God, I'm going to lose my job. My career's over. All of these things, and it actually didn't do that. It created a lot of jobs. Were there some things that went away? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it created new jobs. And the same thing's going to happen with AI. The same thing is going to happen with whatever robotics, humanoid robotics that are coming down the line towards us. They're going to take on jobs that people don't want to do anymore. And free us up to do other things like write books or do research or invent something new, and we'll have a humanoid robot who will be doing our laundry and making our beds and, and helping out in factories and all of those kinds of things.
David, so going from that moment you spoke about that teacher telling you your relationship with books and what that was going to look like. So were you artistic at that point? What does your path look like when you're heading towards art school?
So, I was fortunate because also in that same high school, I had a really great art teacher he was somebody who encouraged me. I remember his name, Conrad Hanslick. He was an accomplished artist himself. He showed at galleries on Long Island his personal work, and he encouraged me, and he was just a great art teacher. And I was fortunate because they still had art teachers in high school. A lot of that has gone away in the recent decades, but he was terrific. And from high school, I was accepted into an advertising art program at a state college in New York. And I started going there. And then I took a TV graphics class, which was one of the first times I created animation with my artwork. Around the same time, somebody handed me an article from the New York Times. And again, these are like serendipity things. Somebody hands me an article, and the article is about this school, California Institute of the Arts in Los Angeles. And it was founded by Walt Disney. They're training the next generation of animators. I got such a kick out of moving my artwork. I decided, okay, I'm going to send my portfolio out there. I don't know, I sent my portfolio. They only accepted 30 students a year, which the program still does. Only 30 students out of, a year get accepted into their animation program. I got accepted. I wound up getting a Walt Disney scholarship. I went through the program. I graduated, and, I had... While I was at school, people would ask me, hey, what are you going to do when you get out of here? Do you want to work at Disney? And I was, oh, no, I'm going to go back to New York. I want to get into commercials. I want to do advertising. And I got out of CalArts. I graduated. and I started working at a small studio in Los Angeles during the summer of that year and into the fall, working on some early video games. And then that company went belly up, and I thought, well, maybe I'll go back to New York. But then a friend of mine called and said, hey, I'm over at Disney and they need help getting this film, The Black Cauldron, finished. Why don't you send your book over? So I sent my portfolio over and I got hired. And I just came in every day and I worked my tail off because I thought, last guy hired, first guy fired, right? I had no illusions about it. I just thought, well,
Yeah.
I'll work as hard as I can and I'll save as much money, because then when I get laid off, I'll figure out what I want to do after that. And so I did that, and I worked overtime the first week I was at the studio, and I continued working overtime for almost a year. And then they started handing out pink slips. And now I was the 28th person into the special effects department. And they wound up laying off 16 people, so almost 2/3 of the group. And I wasn't one of them. I actually was working as hard as I could, spending a lot of time doing overtime. And as they were handing out the pink slips, I finally went into the production manager and I said, hey, can you give me an idea when I'm going to get laid off so I can kind of plan out what I'm going to be doing? I was totally fine about it. Oh, and he looked up at me and he says, oh, we're not laying you off. He goes, you've been working so hard, we're going to keep you.
That's amazing. That's incredible.
So, and then for the next five
Now,
pictures,
was this before or after the conversation you had with your friend John about him giving you the advice about saying yes?
Oh no, this was well before I met John. Really, this was when I first started working at the studio. But I actually had it in my head, like, okay, they're keeping me on for the next picture, but I'll probably get laid off at the end of that picture. And I had that sort of mindset that I better just work really hard and save up, because I'm probably going to get laid off, because this is the way the industry is. A lot of people work from picture to picture and things like that. So I think it was probably 5 pictures in that I realized, I guess they're going to keep me for a while, So, and it turned into 32 years. So,
Dave, what was the relationship between your parents and your art?
Well, my dad actually was in the marketing and advertising business, and he was a writer.
Okay.
So, they encouraged me as far as what it was I wanted to do, as far as being, in the arts or going into advertising. My dad was familiar with that business. So, and by the way, the funny thing, because I was always saying, I'm going to go back to New York and get into commercials, animated commercials, and do advertising and whatnot. And it probably was several years before I did some commercials freelance out in Los Angeles while I was working at Disney, because that was just sort of the norm. People reach out to the artists and, you do something on the weekends or whatever. And so throughout the 1990s, I don't think there was a Tony the Tiger or Rice Krispies or Fruit Loops commercial that I didn't have a hand in. So
that's incredible. So then, so what does that look like after that? And I'm curious when you start to, I don't know if your work, obviously it's further along in your career, but, or before I jump to the boards and all the teaching that you did. So when was it that you had that interaction with your colleague, John, about how to move up or how to stay consistent?
That probably was a couple of years into my tenure at the studio that I got to know John, and he's in his 90s now.
Oh, wow.
But he was just a very enthusiastic individual. He always had a real great attitude. And I think that's a big part of it. He was always positive. But he would always figure out what it was that you needed to do. And to me, to this day, I still think about that, and I still think about what he said. And it is just an absolute guiding principle of let's go figure it out. In fact, I'll tell you, I've had moments throughout my career where somebody says, "Oh, no, we can't do that." And I would sit there and go, "Well, why?" Oh, well, we just have never done that like that before, and you go
That's
on
the
and on.
worst. That's the worst.
And so, I had an interesting situation because, later in my career, I was actually consulting for the legal department at the Walt Disney Company on animation related issues. And one of those was, there was somebody who her husband had done a tremendous amount of work on posters, movie posters, and he had passed away, and she was putting a book together of his work. And she wanted to do a lot of the comps, the different iterations that you would do of a poster before you get to the final version of the poster. She wanted to show that process in the book on various movies. And I get this desperate note. She didn't know me. She reached out to me through a mutual friend. Can you help me? They're not willing to, the Disney company was not willing to let me have this many images for the book. And so I thought, well, that's kind of ridiculous, and I went to the person who was the one that would give the approvals. And I said, well, how come you're not letting this person have this many images? Oh, we just don't do that many images. And I said, well, why? And she said, well, because we just never have done that many images. I said, okay, but what is the actual reason for not doing? She was, well, I don't know. We just have always done it that way, and so I was able to break through all of that, and ultimately was able to get her approved to use the amount of images she wanted to use. And not only that, not charge her a licensing fee for it because her husband created that work for the company.
Nice.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you have to just constantly ask those questions, why can't we do something? You got to drill down, and more often than not, you're going to find a way to actually come up with a workaround to say, well, we can do this if we do X, Y, and Z.
So where do you think that comes in you? Where do you think that comes from? I think I asked you a similar question a couple minutes ago. And I think you maybe you said you weren't sure, or you can't trace it back to anything. But where does that hard-headedness come from? Because I have the same thing. It doesn't always work for me, but I don't know. Maybe it comes from a lifetime of maybe being restrained, and you get to a point where that's bullshit. It just doesn't serve you to be restrained, and it is curiosity. But I always seem to be the one to point out or ask about the 800-pound gorilla in the room that no one else wants to talk about. For you, where do you think that comes from? Did you see that maybe because your father was a creative and he saw possibilities? Did you see it modeled somewhere? Where do you think it might have come from?
I honestly, I would say that in my mind, it's coming from a place of being an artist and trying to create something new, right? And having that curiosity, which I think was further developed through my career at the studio, because the studio is known for creative innovation and trying new things and developing, attractions and immersive experiences that haven't existed before. And so the idea of taking existing technologies and sort of packaging them in a different way. I'll give you an example, because one of the books I wrote, Dali and Disney, Destino, it's a short film that Salvador Dali developed at Disney, at the Walt Disney Studios, because he was friends with Walt. And this was, he developed it in 1946. They got it storyboarded, but they stopped working on it because of financial issues and all kinds of stuff. you fast forward 65 years, and I'm part of the team that helps finish this movie, right? And so the movie gets nominated for an Academy Award. We didn't win, but it won all kinds of accolades across the world at film festivals and stuff like that. And it's a beautiful piece of art, and it also encapsulates a period of studio history when Salvador Dali worked at the Walt Disney Studios. And so after the film was finished, I decided I really want to tell this story, because this is like a 65, 70-year long story of, two unlikely artists coming together to collaborate on a project, and it takes so long for decades later for it to get finished. And in the interim, their artwork was stolen from the studio in the late 60s and then recovered. And, there was intrigue and stuff. It was a fascinating story. And as I was writing that book, I had it in the back of my head that I wanted people to see what the film was, And I thought, well, why can't we put the movie into the book? Right? And so I didn't know how to do that. So what I did was I asked a friend of mine at the Imagineering division, do you know anybody who knows anything about display technology? Oh, yeah, go talk to so-and-so. And so I reached out to this guy Cold. I said, hey, I was talking to so-and-so, and he referred me to you, and this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to put a movie into a book. Could we get together and talk about this idea? And he's like, oh, absolutely. So the long story short was we wound up doing a special edition of my book with a player in it. So when you open the cover of the book, on the inside is a 7-inch screen, and you press a button and you can watch the movie. Now, it was only done as a limited edition. They made 2,500 of them. They sold out, but it was coming up with an idea and following through, not saying someday I'd like to, or I wish I could,
Yep.
I mean, there, I always say, and I saw this someplace years ago, but I always say someday is not part of the week. You have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but you don't have someday. It's not in there. It's not the 8th day, So you just have to, when you come up with an idea, if you're passionate about it, you got to go figure out how to do it. And now those are smaller ideas that are doable. I mean, we could sit here and say, oh God, wouldn't it be great to build a flying car? Okay, that's fantasy, because, the barrier of entry into building an automobile is pretty high. And then, unless you're, a bazillionaire, you might not have the resources to actually do that. But on a smaller scale, every day people come up with, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we could do X? Well, a lot of those ideas you can do. So go figure it out.
Yeah. Dave, so can you speak to, in leading to your talking to us about your book, can you speak to your ascension through the ranks at Disney? Just kind of like highlights so I can capture everything and kind of leave time for the book itself. But can you kind of give us a walkthrough of your role at Disney, and then a brief breakdown of these various memberships and lecture responsibilities and duties and positions that you've had?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned earlier, I started out at the Walt Disney Animation Studios in an entry-level position called an in-betweener. I filled in the drawings in between more senior artists. And I went from that to assistant to animator, to a supervising animator, to visual effects supervisor. And then I took on the role of creative director of a special projects group. They added producer to that, and then eventually head of special projects. And then I took on projects where I was a director, a producer director, I executive produced things. basically, the special projects group I headed became a catch-all for anything that was animation related, needed throughout the entire company. So, I did work on Dancing with the Stars on ABC. I did work on things for ESPN, for publishing, for gaming, live action, just the list goes on and on. And, so, doing all of that, you're just learning as much as you can, and you continue to learn as you move up the ladder. And that's, again, I said it earlier, life is all about it being on a learning curve. You're constantly learning something new. And a lot of people do get into comfort zones. A lot of people get into a zone where I feel very comfortable just doing this, and I get my paycheck every week, But we're living in a world now where it's fast moving because of technology and how things are developing. And I think a lot of jobs that we know today are going to get upended, and I don't think that you can afford to sit in a comfort zone. I think you have to step outside your comfort zone. You have to learn new things. You have to be looking down the line, regardless of the industry you're in, by the way. I happen to be in the entertainment business, so I still keep on top of the trades, the Hollywood Reporter, Variety. I'm constantly reading papers, and I read them online now, I'm constantly soaking in information about what's going on in the business world, what's going on in the entertainment world, what's going on in the technology world. What are the new things coming down? When platforms become available that you can go online and try out, I'm trying those things out. I'm looking at those things. I'm not looking at them to do my work. I'm looking at how can they help me be more efficient in doing what I do, And so, I think that for me, it's really boils down to the curiosity of it all. I regularly fall down rabbit holes, so, because I want to know more about stuff. I just read a great, biography on the underground cartoonist, Robert Crumb. He did the Keep on Trucking logo from the late 60s, and he's sort of the father of underground comics. I read this great 400 plus page biography of him, and I was like, oh, well, now I need to watch the documentary that they made of him. So I watched the documentary. Then I was like, oh, I need to get that coffee table book. So I'm one of those people that I really want to learn as much as I can about subjects that are of interest to me.
And I mean, like you said before, we live in an age where you have that at your fingertips.
Yes.
Like me,
absolutely.
I find myself after I watch a movie that just engrossed me. Okay, where did they shoot it? Is this house real? Is it a set? Like, what are the locations around the world where this was shot? Like, how much was CGI? What was practical? All of that stuff. I do the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
I like to see how stuff is made. We see everything on the surface. I like to see what it is that built to that greatness.
And that to me is what's so great about being curious and looking into those things. It's because it'll spark other ideas for you.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what's so great about it all. And for me, one of the things that I started doing, it's been like 35 years now. I do it every year. Is I take a personal retreat. I go off by myself. I don't bring my wife. I don't bring my kids. I go off by myself for a week or 2 weeks at a clip, and I sit by myself most of that time, and I write in journals. I contemplate ideas of things I want to accomplish in the coming year. I think about things I did over the past year. Did I get everything I wanted accomplished during that year? And the things I didn't get accomplished, why didn't I get them accomplished? Can I get them accomplished this coming year? Those kinds of things. And this book that, we were going to talk about, Find Your Happy Place, the 8-step guide to boosting your creativity through a personal retreat. This book, I was never supposed to write this book. I hardly ever talked about my personal retreat, my process. People close to me knew that I would go off by myself. I go up to, a very secluded place up in Maine every year. And that's part of my annual process of, looking at my goals. And, I have a journal on my bookshelf over here. I can pull it off. It's a college ruled notebook, but I wrote a list of books many years ago that I wanted to write about. And I've crossed off most of those books on that list. Because
what was it? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, because I wrote down a list of things I would enjoy wanting to write a book about.
What was it that first prompted you to take the personal retreat yourself? What was it that prompted you to start that process for yourself?
Well, I think it was the fact that I was in the early stages of my career. It was going very well. I was under a lot of pressure. We had our first child. I felt like I needed to have a break once in a while, and by the way, not just for me, my wife as well. She needed to have a break, So I just decided, you know what, I'm going to go up to Maine and I'm going to spend a week doing some sailing, and I did it. And then I decided, I'm going to go back next year and I'm going to do another week of sailing. And then it continued probably for 10 or 12 years. And then, my career is moving along and I'm getting to a place where, all right, I can take 2 weeks off, and it's not impeding my family from having a family vacation or anything like that. It was just, I'm designating these 2 weeks to go off and just be by myself and to come up with a plan of things I want to accomplish. And ultimately I the longest period I ever took was 3 weeks. And that 3 weeks was too much. Yeah. It was like, it was just too long to be away from home. But I did it, I wanted to try it, but the sweet spot for me is 2 weeks. And what I now do is I go up to the same area in Maine and there's a seasonal school up there. So I spend the first week taking a class in something I don't know how to do.
Gotcha.
Like I've made a pair of oars. I've done printmaking. I've done wood carving. I've carved signs. I've learned all kinds of techniques that aren't going to be used daily for me. But what they've done for me is they allow me to think differently about stuff.
It's like we said before, it's not even stepping outside of your comfort zone, but stepping outside of your lane, your normal, because you're comfortable anywhere. I can see you're curious about anywhere. So it's not even your comfort zone, but stepping outside and really stretching that neuroplasticity of the mind with something completely, I get that.
Yeah. So I take a class for a week. That actually helps clear my mind, right? And then the following week, I am by myself. I may sit at an old picnic table with a college ruled notebook and jot down ideas and journal and things I might want to accomplish, and I just write them. And I'm doing it analog. I don't have a computer.
Yeah.
I'm not tapping on a keyboard.
You're writing.
There's no power there. I'm writing with my hands. I'm thoughtful about what I'm putting down on paper. I'm not relying on spell check or anything like that. So, for me, that it is a process that has really worked well for me in accomplishing all the things that I've accomplished so far and all the things I plan on accomplishing in the future. And the only reason why I wrote this book was the pandemic hit. And all of a sudden, all the things that you normally would be doing, going out and having lunches and traveling and this and that, it was all kind of, the kibosh was put on it for about a year.
Yeah.
And so I found that I had a lot of free time. I was just finishing off a book. I had another book I was going to start, but I had several people say to me over the years, you should write about your retreat process, and I always thought, it's really something I've done and I've developed over the years. And, I don't know if anybody'd be interested in it. And then, and by the way, so I got to step back for a second because I didn't tell you this. After I had my first book done, the Roy Disney book, Remembering Roy E. Disney, and then I pitched my second book and then my third book, and I got a literary agent, I actually enrolled in the writing program at UCLA. And I was taking the classes in the writing program at night. At the Westwood campus in Los Angeles for UCLA, and I wound up getting a certificate in creative nonfiction and a certificate in fiction writing from UCLA, and that was all because I was like, writing books, I really should improve my writing, so I'm going to go into this writing program, which I had never thought about doing until I started writing the books. So all these things are interconnected, and they're all leading you someplace. And for me, it was just improving my writing. And I've had people say to me, hey, from your first book to your latest book, I could see a real improvement in your writing technique, in your voice and, your style and all of this stuff. And I don't take that as criticism. I take that as, as a compliment, you know? So
Dave, so in your path through Disney, can you give some examples where I don't know, I'm assuming towards the tail end of Disney, some of these board memberships, some of these teaching positions, can you give some examples of how you ended up in some of those?
Well, a lot of this stuff, again, drops in your lap. Right. So as far as becoming a member of the motion picture, the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences, the Academy Awards, I vote on the Academy Awards every year, but you have to meet a certain criteria. You have to have so many screen credits, and then you have to be recommended by two people that are already members. So that happened for me very early on. I've been a member of the Motion Picture Academy for, gosh, it's got to be almost 35 years.
Wow.
And so, because I'm a member of the Motion Picture Academy, when they started the Visual Effects Society, VES, I was a visual effects artist, so I had the screen credits for it, so I became a member of that. A lot of these speaking gigs, they're just reaching out to me, because of, I worked on this, worked on that, I've published this, published that. This most recent talk that I did at the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, they found me online and reached out to me to come to Dallas to speak. So I was happy to do it, and that's how most of the speaking gigs come about, is people reaching out to me, whether through social media or whatever.
That's incredible.
But like the Carnegie Mellon, I had done, I was a visiting scholar at Carnegie Mellon's Entertainment Technology Center. Again, it was through invitation. I did that for quite a number of years. I haven't been doing that anymore. I don't know. I guess you read my bio in the current book, or in one of these books that I've written.
Listen, this is a part of your history. I didn't commit that this stuff that he's doing all of this stuff now.
Yeah.
But hey, this is all part of your story.
Like I did it for quite a number of years,
Yeah.
And I still am in touch with people there and stuff like that. But it's again, those things come your way and you say, yes, I want to do that, and the more you do them, the better you get at them.
Yeah. And what's funny is you've used the word serendipity. For that question, I always used to include that word. So I would say, understand how you got here. Can you give me a sense of how you started your path? Was it family? Was it education? Was it serendipity? After a while, that word just dropped off. It's been a couple years since I've used the word when posing the question,
Yeah.
but here you are, the perfect response for that question. Even though I didn't use the word, I love that you've brought up that, it's a combination of being ready, working hard, and saying yes. So I appreciate your response to that. Dave, does it make sense? I think I can tie everything together, but does it make sense from your childhood that this is what you're doing? Not that you planned it this way, not that this is what you wanted to get to, but how do you tie what you're doing today into your childhood or who you were as a kid?
John, it's a great question because I have conducted hundreds of interviews. I have a podcast that I co-host with a gentleman, friend of mine, and it's Disney animation, pop culture related. Okay. It's called the Skull Rock Podcast. And every week we have, I do an interview, and then it's bookended with what's going on in the entertainment business, what the box office was, what movies, hot at that moment, what streaming shows and all of that. And the thing that I've gained from all of those interviews is that typically, if you're passionate about something in your childhood, that's going to lead you to what you're doing, and, there's I was always drawing as a kid. I always liked to draw. I always liked art and creating stuff. And so I always knew that I would go into some sort of creative endeavor. And what that was going to be, was I going to be an artist at Disney? I never thought I was going to be an artist at Disney, but I never thought I'd write a book either, right? So, these are things where you have to not try and plan out your entire life in front of you, but rather you have to just let it happen and be prepared for the opportunities that drop your way. And we all have opportunities that drop our way. And so, talking to all of these artists and filmmakers and musicians and composers and stuff, they were all interested in what they were doing when they were kids. There's a common thread that goes through it. Why do you think when you look at firefighters or police officers that they're coming from a family of firefighters or police officers? I have a friend in New York who he's a retired firefighter now, but his cousins and his brother and his father and all of these people in his family were all part of the New York Fire Department.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like a family thing. And the same with police officers. You see it now in sports and in acting. Where the children of well-known actors are becoming actors themselves, and just they're carving their own niche. It's interesting. I started watching a new streaming show on Amazon Prime called Young Sherlock.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the leads is from the Fiennes, Ralph Fiennes, who's an actor, is his uncle, right? And Jeremy Irons, his son, is in the and by the way, they're not riding on their relatives' coattails, because they're accomplished actors and they're doing a great job in those roles. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's sort of a natural thing for you, if you're around something that your father's doing, that you may get involved with it. That's why I was like, oh, I'm going to go into advertising, because I grew up in a household where it was advertising. Now,
awesome.
Conversely, my oldest daughter grew up in a house where, she was a Disney kid because I worked at Disney. She grew up being exposed to Disney. Well, she wound up working at Disney for 10 years before she moved to France. So,
Incredible.
these are things that happen to you that you're not necessarily conscious of, but if you're passionate about something as a kid, I remember when I was a kid, I was in the local coin club and I collected coins, and I had a friend who's my age who did the same thing, but he was really passionate about it. He made a career out of coins. He became a
Yeah.
coin dealer, and he's done very well for himself. You know what I mean? So when you start to look around and start to think about friends and people you grew up with and go, well, that makes sense that he went into that,
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen so many examples of people that are very successful in certain areas. And then other people that were working with them and they were wondering, well, why them? And most often it was because that person kind of, not in a bad way for them, but they lived and breathed it.
Yeah.
You worked hard, but you could see like it's a part of them. So I appreciate you bringing up that passion and what it does for you, what it can be for you. Dave, what do you consider your superpower?
Gosh, I honestly, I think my superpower is curiosity. I really do, because I'm just
I think
curious.
you've given some great examples of that.
I'm the guy you can't get away from at a party sometimes, because when I meet somebody and they're doing something fascinating, I just sit there, keep asking them questions. I keep peppering them with questions, and at some point I've experienced the feeling like, this person just doesn't want to talk about what they're doing. They're at a party,
Have you felt like since you've worked on your podcast that it's only increased at all? Have you felt since you've launched your podcast that curiosity has only increased more?
Yeah, I think it has, but the other thing too is I think what doing the podcast has allowed me to improve upon is my listening skills, because I do, and John, I'll compliment you because you're being very thoughtful in your questions, but then you kind of just sit there and you let me talk. Right. I do the same thing. This is sort of the reverse of what I do on my podcast, because I'll ask somebody a simple question and I shut my mouth and I just want them to just go on, tell your story, and then once they pause, I may say, hey, you just said this.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that? So.
It's for me, I mean, obviously you've worked in art. For me, this is an art form, just kind of getting to know my fellow human being. That's the way I see it. Dave, one more question before we jump into your book. What does leadership mean to you? I'd be remiss if I didn't ask as a leadership coach. How would you define leadership?
Well, to me, leadership is having the courage to listen to your team and to guide them. Really, you're a guide. You're the docent of a team, I like to say. You're the person holding the umbrella and saying, we've got to go in this direction, but you listen to your team. You allow them to question things, ask questions, and learn along the way. I encouraged the people that I had always had on my teams. In fact, I will tell you that over the years, I had an assistant. But every time I hired an assistant, I always asked the assistant, what is it you want to do? Do you want to go into production? What do you want? What's your ultimate goal? And they would tell me, and I would help them achieve that. So, it turned out, I think every 2 years I'd have to get a new assistant because I was promoting the assistant I had.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing was that I also looked in different places. Being at the Walt Disney Company, I knew a lot of people, and I got a lot of assistance out of the concierge area of the resorts. And so these were people who went into hospitality, got into concierge where they're helping guests out with whatever, restaurants, this, that, the other thing. They have good people skills. They spoke well. but they wanted to advance their careers and move into something new. And so I hired a lot of people out of the concierge area of Walt Disney World through people I knew. I would just put out the word, "Hey, I'm promoting my assistant to, being a production coordinator,
Again.
and I need a new assistant. Is there, anybody
Yeah.
in this area that might be interested?" And then, you'd get a couple of resumes, and then you'd interview those people, and then you say, "Okay, great, I want to hire you." So
Was that, you're a curious guy, you're a people person. Was that consideration for what your assistant might want to do in the future? Was that modeled for you? Did somebody do it for you? And
not really. It was always my intent that I wanted to make sure that anybody I was working with or leading, if you will, who was part of my team, I wanted to make sure that they were doing what they wanted to do. And I had people who loved just what they were doing. They weren't interested in advancing. But I had other people who said, "Well, I eventually want to get here." And I'd be like, "Okay, let me help you do that."
amazing, amazing.
Yeah. So
Dave, jumping into the book, you already gave great background on your personal retreats. You already gave great background on what the impetus was. People saying, maybe you should share about your personal retreats, and you were kind of hesitant, thinking that nobody would be interested in them. So we got those points out of the way. But for you, how do you then go to set the book up? To kind of demonstrate your process. What does the book look like? How do you walk the reader through the personal retreat process, I guess?
I gave some background on it, just as, and part of it was opening up personally. It's being authentic in what you're writing. And so, I opened it up, telling some personal stories of, why I was doing this and how it's helped me. And then I stepped through really what I boiled it down to was this 8-step guide of just being able to help somebody plan out what they would do if they took a personal retreat. And it's really starting out with, how much time and when to take it. And I'm also saying, I say in there that, I'm lucky because I can take a week or I could take 2 weeks. Not everybody can do that. But can you take a day? Can you take a weekend? Can you do 2 days? Because you can put this process into any amount of time that you feel you can do, and it's really up to you. The point is that it's kind of self-care. It's you're doing something for yourself, and you're setting yourself up with a roadmap, not for 10 years, but for 12 months.
Yeah.
Or 6 months, And then it's determining where you're taking your retreat. It's talking about goals and how to achieve them. A lot of books talk about goals and talk about setting goals and achieving goals, and how many people actually follow those, those things. I don't find a lot of people doing it, and I kind of feel like having a goal is sort of having a roadmap. It's if you were going to go on a road trip someplace, don't you want to know where you're going and how you're going to get there? And that's really what the goals are. The goals are, I want to do X. Well, how do I get there? And you break that down into some chunks so that it's not overwhelming and it's not something you're going to be discouraged by. Because if you break your goals down into these little pieces, you can accomplish those little pieces. And once you get all those pieces accomplished, you've accomplished that goal. So it's not that difficult for people to understand. So, but I talk about, journaling your intentions, I talk about healthy mind, healthy body, your actual retreat, getting the most out of it. Again, examples of what I do every single year. I also delve into creative thinking because, I believe everybody has a certain amount of creativity. It's just that some people have their creativity develop much further along than others do, you
Yeah,
know?
absolutely.
And I think it's, for me, what's so great about going on a personal retreat by yourself is you're not influenced by anybody. There isn't somebody sitting next to you going, "Oh no, you can't do that," because you
Yeah.
could think about anything you want. You could talk to yourself. You could sit and cry. You could, shout at the world. You could do whatever you want because you're sitting by yourself someplace.
Have you
You
done
know,
all those things?
I've done all those things. I've done all of those things, and I've also sat quietly and just listened to the water lapping against the shore, and a metal clip banging on a halyard, a halyard banging on on an aluminum mast or whatever it is. I've sat there doing those things, and then visualization. I talk about visualization because it was a huge part of what I did at the Walt Disney Company. Before I even started working on creating some animation for a movie, I would often sit in a little, I had a lounge chair in my office. I would usually sit in that lounge chair, close my eyes, and I would think about what it was I was going to animate. I'd get a clear picture in my mind of what I was going to animate. And I would then get up and go do it. And now that could take hours of just sitting there thinking about it. In fact, I have to tell you, there were some production people that thought, "Oh, he's just goofing off again. He's taking a nap. He's he's not doing his work."
Yeah.
But the fact is that was part of the work process, was having a clear picture in your mind of what it was you wanted to create on paper. Now, you can take that and you can say, "I'm going to have a clear picture in my mind of what I want to accomplish with a woodworking project, or how I want to build a chair, or how I want to do any number of things." It's all about visualization. So I talk about that. And I really spend a little bit of time on the creative thinking part, because a lot of that, again, is connecting dots and being able to have yourself in the right frame of mind to be able to do that, and not to be so negative, and to stop listening to the voices in your head.
So many questions. Dave, what kind of response have you gotten from parents? Because you had mentioned, listen, I went on this retreat. It didn't mean that I lost vacation time with my family. A few things. I came across an article a couple of weeks ago in The Atlantic that talked about, I think it was a father, and how life was boring once he had kids, that he was finding himself more bored. And people came after him and yada, yada, yada. If you're so bored, then don't have kids. You know how people are. But it's like a paradox, and I could relate to him. When you have a child in your care, you have to step away from some of your passions, because they obviously, it takes more time to take care of a young child, various ages. You get a little more of your time back. So I'm curious, what kind of reaction, if any, specifically from parents have you gotten, or moms or dads? Like, how am I supposed to do that if I have a family? Or have you gotten people that have said, well, why would you want to get away from your family? Can you speak to that? Because
Sure.
This is obviously your concept, your book.
Yeah,
and you were considerate enough to say, this doesn't take away from my family. So if you could speak to that just a bit more, that'd be great.
Look, it doesn't take away from your family to have your own time. I'll just say that. Everybody needs to have their own time, and everybody has to be able to make their own time. I don't buy into excuses that I don't have time. Because if you track what you're doing throughout the day, you can find your time. I also point to the fact that you look at somebody like J.K. Rowling, who wrote the Harry Potter series. She's a billionaire, right?
Yeah.
When she was first writing her first Harry Potter book, She was on state assistance. She was on welfare, basically, right?
Yep.
She had a kid. She was a single mother. She was going into a coffee shop and writing for an hour here and an hour there,
Yep.
right? So where there's a will, there's a way, right? I mean, we've all heard that expression.
Absolutely.
You have to figure it out as to what's going to work for you. Now, I've had people say to me over the years, I don't know how your wife lets you do that, going off by yourself. My wife would never let me do that, the bottom line is that whatever your particular situation is, you have to go figure it out. I was able to do a week or 2 weeks. Maybe you can get away for a day. Maybe you can decide, I'm going to go find this great spot in a park near me. I don't have to go to a hotel. I can go make a sandwich for myself and bring it with me. You can go sit in some secluded area of a park with nobody around and just veg out, if you will. In other words, just sit there and think about whatever comes to your mind and come up with some thoughts of what you want to accomplish, what you might want to do, goals you might have. You can do those things. So I don't take the excuse like my wife would never let me do that, because that's baloney.
Does your wife practice it herself?
Yes, she has, but not as consistently as I have.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So she's gone off and done things on her own, or she's gone with a girlfriend someplace, and they've taken, like a couple of days at a spa or whatever, which is a different kind of thing than what I'm doing, but it's still taking time for yourself. It's that self-care that people have to think about. And there's nothing wrong with that. I didn't do it to get away from my kids. I did it because I needed to have some time for myself, right? Just like my kids need to have time for themselves, and my wife needs to have time for herself, right? So we all need to have our little bit of time. I get it. I structure mine a little differently than most people might structure theirs. And, again, you can look at my book, Find Your Happy Place, the 8-step guide to boosting your creativity through a personal retreat, as a little bit of a roadmap to figure out what it is you want to do. But it works for me. It may not work for other people, or other people may have excuses as to why they can't do it. And that's okay if that's how they want to approach it. But this works for me, and it's been beneficial to a lot of people. I've gotten some wonderful feedback from folks about it.
Dave, so you've been doing these personal retreats for over 30 years.
More than 35 years now.
35 plus years. So obviously this is your thing. You realize it. You know it. Like, this is your go-to thing. But I'm curious, even the specialists that I interview on the books or have conversation with on the books that they write, is there anything that you realized or learned in the process of putting this book together? Maybe the way you view it? Did any of the thinking on the personal retreat evolve as you were putting the book together?
I think so. I mean, honestly, I think, diving in and doing research on creative thinking and reading some research papers and things like that, there were things I learned that were probably in the back of my mind, but, it sort of became more clear when I read a paper on, creative thinking and things like that. But, a lot of this is what I do. And I put it down in the book and, created this guide. If it'll help somebody, fantastic. If it doesn't, well, that's okay too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of self-help books out there, but I just felt like, this was something that was in me that I wanted to put on paper, and I did, and I was glad I did. And, will I do another one like this? Possibly. I did a talk. I was asked to do a talk last year, and it was at an animation expo. And, the animation industry is going through a very tough patch right now. There's a lot of people who aren't working. And so I came up with a talk about finding opportunities in these tough environments, and, it's something that, just pulling up a note that I had on my desk. If I can find it. No, there it is. The talk I gave, I called it, and again, this is me overthinking it a little bit, but because I did the Finding Your Happy Place, the 8-step guide, I called this one Find Your Happy Place, Thriving in Turbulent Times. The 5 secrets to spotting opportunity in every challenge.
Absolutely.
And again, I was trying to inspire people not to, be down on themselves, but instead to, shift their thinking, if you will, and one of the first things I talked about was you must shift your mindset from fear to curiosity.
Yeah.
Because fear is paralyzing for people.
Oh, absolutely.
It really is. And to shift to curiosity and asking questions. And then I talk about you must look for the gaps, the unmet needs, and that's, again, being observant and looking for, how is it that you can, during tough times, how can you shine a spotlight on what isn't working and peel back the layers and expose those gaps, and those places where people are frustrated or confused. Every frustration hides an opportunity to figure out how to, fix something.
Yeah. Dave, what book has inspired you or made an impact on you?
Oh my gosh. There's just really so many books, that I've read over the years. I'm very inspired. Like, I talked about Crumb, I read his biography and I just thought, my gosh, it was an inspiring story, of how somebody, came from a very dysfunctional and rough upbringing, and became, this multi-millionaire from his art now, so, but, I read a lot of books, The Mysterious Case of Rudolf Diesel, the man who developed, the diesel engine, I was just very fascinated by that, The Millionaire Mind. Or The Millionaire Mindset, those types of books. I read those books all the time because I find them very inspiring.
Dave, in wrapping up, what are you up to these days that you might want to share? Anything that I might not have asked? Anything you want to share here? Please, the floor is yours.
Well, again, I'm always writing. That talk I just was mentioning that I did last fall. I may actually expand that into a part of the Find Your Happy Place books, make it a series. And why not? There's a lot of things that I feel like I've learned, through the School of Hard Knocks.
Absolutely.
You learn on the job. And but I am in the midst of finishing off my new book, which is called Walt Disney World War II: Animation on the Front Lines, and that's going to be coming out in the fall. And again, when I finish one book, I move on to whatever the next one's going to be. I'm not 100% sure what the next one's going to be, but usually it bubbles to the surface for me, and then I start going to town on getting that done, and so on and so forth. I mean, the fact is, John, I've got book projects stacked out to 2032. So, and these are real books that I know I'm going to be able to do and get done. But
I think you need to write a book on retirement.
again, I think we started out early in our conversation. I just basically do not like that word, and I don't think anybody should ever retire. I think you should shift gears and do whatever it is that you like and enjoy doing. And it's okay to slow down a little bit and not have to have, an urgency of getting things done. I'm happy working on books where I do research for a couple of years and then eventually put it in the queue to put it out. That's why I'm able to put out a book a year.
That's incredible.
It is because of the fact that I've been, writing and researching for, so many years before, that book comes out. So, I mean, this book, Find Your Happy Place, the 8-Step Guide. This book, I think I wrote it, but it took 4 years before it came out.
Yeah.
Because once I had it written, writing is all about rewriting.
Oh, yeah.
I think some people think, I'm going to sit down and write a book. And then as soon as somebody starts giving them notes and you need to edit this and change that, they get discouraged.
The dreaded first draft.
This is hard. This is hard. It's a lot of work. But, writing a book is all about rewriting. And, you're going to write it. You're going to write your first draft, then you're going to go back in and you're going to rewrite it. Then you're going to rewrite it again. You may even rewrite it a third time. And then at that point, you may then say, I'm going to let some people read it. And then they're going to read it. And then you're going to give you notes. And then you're going to go back in and do another writing pass on it. Yeah. And then you're going to have an editor look at it, and they're going to give you notes, and you're going to make adjustments, and then the copy editor. And, it's a whole process. And the key is that each iteration, it's getting better and better and better.
Absolutely. And again, David shared his book, Find Your Happy Place, the 8-Step Guide to Boosting Your Creativity Through a Personal Retreat. David, thank you so much for everything you shared in this conversation.
It was my pleasure, John. Thank you very much for having me on your show.
It was a pleasure. If there's anything I might have missed, there's so much to cover, limited time, please let me know. Reach out to me. I'll reach out to David, see what kind of additional guidance, insight, information, anything at all I can get back. In the meantime, thank you for watching, listening, and subscribing, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.